Hi guys, this is KlazartSC being an audio commentary, and we've got Fantasy in purple and Canata in what looks like yellow. Yep, Canata in yellow. This is going to be an outsider. Canata at the 6 o'clock position. Fantasy in purple at the 12 o'clock position. This is game 2 of the OSL round of 8, the Bacchus OSL. And it's going to be, as I said, it's going to be an outsider. We had Fantasy taking game 1 quite comfortably against Canata. Canata has been playing well recently. We've seen him performing in the MSL and in the OSL as well. And he's made it quite far in both of these leagues. And some people are talking about finally leading up to that potential that he was rumored to have had all that time ago. That is an excellent poster. But I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here, guys. Fighting indeed. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here because some wise guy left a comment in the Vol-Attack threads in I think the commentary of Canata versus Jaedong, and the results, some of those strategies used in those games will be spoiled for you. So go watch Canata versus Jaedong first in the MSL, guys, on the Vol-Attack account. Otherwise, the results of those games will be spoiled for you if you haven't seen them already. So yeah, commenting that, well, when Boxer does 8 racks, it's not cheese, but when Canata does it, I call it cheese. And SK Team 1 fan in the house. I am one myself. I've got to say, I'm seeing a lot more international international viewers in the Korean audiences these days. I think that's purely down to StarCraft. I think StarCraft is increasing the Korean tourist trade, and if it was up to me, the Korean government would fund more of it. Looks like Canada putting his racks down Fantasy, while both players with mirror builds to start with, neither player going for anything crazy or any sort of cheese to begin with, at least. But yeah, I just wanted to point out the difference between Boxer's creativity and Canada's so-called creativity. What Canada did versus Jaedong was went 8 racks in 3 games out of a best of 5. 8 racks / bunker rush in 3 games out of a best of 5, winning 2 of them and losing the 3rd one. That, my friends, is not creativity. What Boxer does, if you look at his games, in each game he does something innovative and new. If you look at his game versus Reach, he started off with a standard opening, saw Reach expand and take that expansion at the 11 o'clock on Python when Reach took his 3rd expansion. Boxer, rather than do the standard Terran thing and try and make go concentrate on a mid-game push, went and took the expansion at the 5 o'clock position, a risky maneuver which ended up paying off well for him, even though Reach took that did a lot of damage to that expansion initially. Versus Toss Girl, he countered 2 port raids with 1 port cloaked raids, and he actually went 1 port cloak raids blind to begin with. Canada now sending his SCV out to scout Fantasy. Both players starting up their factories, it looks like. Actually, yeah, both players starting up their factories. So that's what he did versus Toss Girl. Versus Yellow, we saw him use nukes on Nostalgia, a map that doesn't even have gas in the friggin' natural. And then we saw him versus Nada, where he did a 4 racks rush. Boxer doesn't do cheap-ass hide-in-the-corner 8 racks rushes. Boxer puts a 4 racks outside your motherfucking front door ramp and charges in and kills you. That is why Boxer is a creative player, and that is why Canada was just cheesing and not really, in my opinion, deserving of going through into the next rounds of the MSL. But that's my opinion, guys. Everyone's welcome to have a different point of view. And careless by Fantasy, they're letting Canada's SCV live, not able to polish it off, and Canada's going to get a little bit more scouting information, which is not what Fantasy would have wanted. Meanwhile, Canada looks like he's putting his machine shop down. I'm not sure if Fantasy's going to do the same. I think Fantasy sent an SCV out. I think Fantasy might either be sending an SCV out to scout, or potentially, I thought he was looking to maybe put a command center on. He's actually putting his starport down, so that's the difference. And it looks like he's finally managed to kill that SCV of Canada's as well. So yeah, Canada is, while Canada might be doing his roses are red and violets are blue, Boxer's poetry of StarCraft is more like roses are Zergling blood and violets are Dragoon blood. And that's the difference between the two. Boxer's poetry of StarCraft that we see unfolding before our eyes as he etches his art on the screen. There is no comparison between that and Canada. So to the wise guy who was saying that when Canada does an 8 racks, that's just as creative as when Boxer does something similar, get a friggin' clue, mate. That's all I have to say to you. Looks like now Fantasy, so let's just concentrate on this game. Both players with virtually, thank God I have had time to make that little rant, because both players with virtually identical builds to start out with, and nothing that exciting happening. Although it does look like Fantasy has put the starport with control tower down, now taking his expansion. Canada is starting up his expansion as well, although I haven't seen the starport with control tower down for him thus far. So I wonder where those extra resources have gone, whether he's put a 2nd factory down somewhere, or what he's choosing to do, because he's only got the 1 factory down so far. He's got a tank as well as 4 Marines out. Canada's got the tank as well as 4 Marines out. Canada, Fantasy with only the Vulture and a couple of Marines. Both players' racks floating around in the middle, but it doesn't look like Canada and now Fantasy's got his siege tank out as well, and Fantasy looks like he might be researching Cloak there in that starport, because he had the control tower whirring away. So I'm not sure what Fantasy's researching in that control tower. Vulture just coming in, trying to get some scouting information. Obviously, Canata doing the smart thing, building that command center, behind in his main, up behind the cliff, and so therefore Canata's not going to know what strategy Fantasy is going for, whether Fantasy has put a second racks down, a second factory down, or whether he's put a starport down, what he's down. So Fantasy playing a little bit blind here, and that definitely gives Canata a little bit of an advantage early on. Obviously, right now, Fantasy's in the lead 1-0 since he won the first game, and now Canata looks like he was trying to make that push there, but for some reason decides to back off. I think after seeing that Wraith push against his racks, he feels that racks is probably going to go down. He's not going to be able to hold it, and he's not going to have the spot he needs over his opponent's base, while his opponent is going to have his own racks to spot. Trying to bring the Marines down to save that racks. He might just about be able to save it. The Marines push the Wraith away. I mean, it's an interesting choice of strategy for Fantasy to get that Wraith. Obviously, it nullifies his opponent's dropships if his opponent does go for that. However, Canata hasn't gone for that, so that puts Canata in a decent position right now, because he's got a strongish ground force. He's got 3 siege tanks out, I think, to Fantasy's 2. He's now putting up his second factory. It does seem to be like Canata has gone for, I think the difference is Canata's gone for that armory. I think that's where Canata spent those resources, because I was wondering where Canata, both players with virtually identical builds, yet Canata had only the one factory with the machine shop, while Fantasy had the factory with the machine shop as well as the Sandsmith. Canata now pushing in with the 3 siege tanks. He's going to lay siege just outside Fantasy's front door. Fantasy doesn't have siege mode as of yet, and that's the other difference. Fantasy's machine shop still spinning, and Fantasy might lose his extractor here. That supply depot that was being built gets taken down, and that extractor is coming on a lot of fire. Fantasy, however, has got cloaked, and he's got raids. He's bringing those raids in. There are only 3 Marines there, so Fantasy might be able to stem this attack, but he really needs to save that extractor. That's absolutely critical. Now with the cloak raids firing away at the siege tank, scan goes off by Canata, manages to scare those raids away temporarily, and the extractor goes down. That is huge. The refinery, sorry, not the extractor, the refinery goes down. That is huge. And now Canata, once he's got siege mode, brings those SCVs out to try and clean this up. So Fantasy with under a lot of pressure, he's going to be able to defend this. He's going to be able to hold it. A couple of Goliaths come into the fray from Canata, but they're not really going to get there in time, unfortunately, to support those siege tanks. So Fantasy just about holds his defense, and you might argue that he could be in a little bit of trouble. However, Canata is only just now putting down his own refinery, so Fantasy isn't really going to be that far behind in terms of his economy. Both players with refineries on at the same time. However, he was forced to sacrifice a few of his SCVs. That's not a position he wants to be in. He's now established a decent defensive posture. That racks, unfortunately, burns down for Canata, now producing a couple more Goliaths. And now Canata putting down his starport. The main advantage Fantasy has is that he does have that starport with control tower, so he is going to have be able to put a couple of dropships out early on and potentially do a little bit of harassment that way, and try and perhaps get a lead in the number of dropships he has and get air control. So Fantasy with some good defense, Canata with some great pressure early on, and I think all of that was down to Fantasy not having the information about what his opponent was up to. They both went for virtually identical builds, but Canata obviously expended his resources on the siege mode and on the armory, while Fantasy was still putting that starport and control tower down. Now he does have those raids, he does have air superiority, he does have air control. One of the raids is going to get taken out, definitely. One of the raids goes down, gets sniped by the Goliaths, flies right into Canata's troops. That was unfortunate for Fantasy. He still has one alive, and he really should be preserving these raids as far as I'm concerned. He's now cloaks that. He's going to see what Fantasy's up to. He's going to get that scouting information critically that he needs. He's going to be able to, I mean, he should just use the comsat scans for that. His opponent doesn't have anything that he's going to otherwise be wasting comsat scans on. So unless Fantasy doesn't have, and Fantasy doesn't have the Academy. Sorry guys, I didn't spot that. Fantasy now putting his 3rd command center down. Canata doing the same, it looks like. Fantasy at the 12 o'clock base at the min only there, and Canata looks like he's gone for the 3 o'clock min only. Now Fantasy is coming in with that dropship. Finally the dropship's coming into play, but I feel that Fantasy sacrifices raids carelessly. However, Canata is choosing this moment in time to maneuver his units out. That's not actually a command center at that 3 o'clock base, so Fantasy not putting the command center there. He's just got a supply depot. Canata now, Canata's got a supply depot there. Now Fantasy's able to shell his extractor. He's got a Wraith hovering up above it as well. He's got 2 siege tanks in there. Canata looks like he might be going again for Fantasy's front door, because Fantasy's only got 2 siege tanks positioned there. Fantasy continues to harass Canata's Canata's refinery, and Canata might be in a little bit of trouble here, but Fantasy could be in trouble defending this if Canata makes that push. Canata with 3 siege tanks and Goliaths. But the problem for Canata is that he's going to struggle to hold that refinery, because Fantasy has got that dropship, and that's the tactical advantage coming to play for Fantasy strategy. And Fantasy does have 3 more siege tanks behind there as a second line of defense. So Canata pushing out with the siege tanks and Goliaths, not able to do anything. Unfortunately for him, Fantasy does have air superiority. Fantasy with that one Wraith can hold Canata back, and he successfully harasses Canata's refinery, and I feel that that's brought the game back into balance. Any advantage that Canata might have gained from his early push on Fantasy's front door has been neutralized. Canata does have and Fantasy meanwhile is holding that position. at that expansion, he drops a couple more siege tanks. He's holding that 3 o'clock position. That's going to be incredibly annoying for Canata. Canata just repaired or rebuilt that refinery, and now it's coming under fire again. He's not getting gas from that at all. And really, as a Terran player, you don't want to be in a position where you're getting 2 gas in 3. Now Canata coming in with a drop on top of Fantasy's 2 siege tanks. He's going to be able to take those down. Goliath's focusing on that dropship as well, which is exactly the right thing to do rather than focus the siege tank down. But Fantasy manages to save the dropship and pull it back. Canata once again pushing forward, but Canata I feel is now behind. Fantasy's got 3 factories with machine shops. Canata I think has only got the 2 factories at least with machine shops. Canata is only now starting up his 3rd expansion. Fantasy's had his up and running for a little while now. Canata does have 2 factories with machine shops. He's now building his 3rd and 4th factory, but you feel that Fantasy is starting to run away with this game. And look at that, a lot of siege tanks for Fantasy. Canata doesn't have anything to reply to this right now, and Fantasy's going to be able to take an excellent position in this map, and he's going to be able to push forward. He's got a lot of siege tanks there. Canata trying to run an SCV around those siege tanks to get a bit of a scout. Fantasy manages to take